There's none of that. There's none of that happening in this moment. Um, what this is what years of deregulation has brought us. I mean, all of these horrible, the train derailments, the fires, the explosions. Again, not part of some nefarious plot or end time scenario. It's what happens when you unleash radical self interest for corporations. It's what happens when you deregulate. It's what happens when there's no oversight. It's pretty simple to me. And the fact that Ohio is front and center right now is, well, a big part of this. Massive explosion today. We don't know the cause of it, but I got to tell you, I've seen these stories time and time again. We were in Texas a number of years back when there was a massive explosion there, and it pointed out the sad reality that who knew that you could put ammonium nitrate in wooden containers in a wooden shed in the hot summer sun without any sprinkler systems or any of that. Who knows if someone lit that on fire that it would explode if you didn't have any fire retardation program to make sure that it stops. Who knew regulation? And this is the interesting part when the attorney general was asked about it. They said if you wanted to know, you could have just gone and asked. The neighbors could have just gone and knocked on the building's door and said, "Hey, we'd like to inspect your facility there." Yeah, good luck on that. Now the weird thing is, over the weekend, in not more than several miles from where this explosion that we're watching right now happened, you had another explosion. They're saying that was a failed boiler. It was heard miles around. At the Warren Coke plant, of ArcelorMittal out there in Warren, Ohio. Or this is actually it was Trumbull County. But fortunately, no lives lost, no damage to human life. But again, another explosion. Who knows what that could have been? And you look at what happened in East Palestine. Comes back to there's no cop on the beat. And I know I've been seeing all this conspiracy, and there's lots. Oh my goodness, the conspiracy theories that are bubbling up around because all of this stuff, people are paying attention to it now. Not new, mind you. This is stuff we've been talking about on this program for years. Not new, but the conspiracies are now jumping on, and it's again this nefarious plot by Biden, especially. When the reality is this is what Republican laissez-faire economics gets you. This is where, this idea that corporations are going to police themselves. Not so much. Today, we also found out that Norfolk Southern, their CEO, Alan Shaw, who, remember, a guy who pockets about $4.3 million a year salary, they're going to go and they have offered $1,000 to everyone in the 44413 zip code. And I went and looked this up. There are, according to the Googles, 7,262 people in that zip code, which means it's going to be about $7.6 million, or about 1.5 times what Mr. Shaw puts in his pocket. So you go, well, that's not really a penalty. Now they say that there's no NDAs, we just because we care. And what this really is this is a self-imposed penalty. This is brilliant. This is masterful public relations, getting out ahead of it. Oh, we're partners together. This is what I was saying, last week. What the right is doing masterfully and what Republican legislators are doing is they're taking all the heat off of Norfolk Southern, putting it on the back of Buttigieg and Biden, because there's already a disdain on the right for them anyway. So this is a perfect place. By moving this over, saying, oh, well, it's look at how well the company's taking care of you. They're giving you $1,000. How great is that? Considering the poverty rate in that county really high, $1,000 seems like a lot of money. Now, when you stop and you think about it, and walk with me, if you will, the reality that this is a company that profited $4.8 billion, pure profit in their pocket, After everything was said and done, $4.8 billion profit. They had a stock buyback program last year, $4.23 billion. Billion with a B. Not the million with an M, billion with a B. They're offering those people $7.6 million. What percentage of that is of the profits? It is literally a drop in the bucket. Now you go, well, the $4.23 billion stock buyback program. What that tells me they're admitting we have no useful use for this money. Understand? In August of 2022, they also came up with a $15 billion stock buyback program over the next several years. So they 4.23 they did. They're planning 15 billion with a B more in stock buybacks, which again is saying, hey, we've got no productive use for this. And I'm looking at this scenario going, I don't know how old those rail cars were, but they didn't look new. I got to wonder how long those bearings were running the rails that failed. Maybe you could have replaced those. I don't know. Instead of pushing for one-man crews, maybe have 4 or 5 people on the train. That maybe this gets seen faster. Maybe this maybe because you clearly have the revenue to do this. You clearly have the revenue to make other choices, other decisions. You clearly have the ability to mitigate some of this stuff. By investing in infrastructure, investing in your train cars, investing in the human resource. You clearly have it. Because you're talking about over the next several years, almost $20 billion in stock buybacks. That's not even the profits that they're sharing out. Now I look at this, coming out with $1,000. This is brilliant PR. Brilliant. Now, the weird thing is when I say something about this, all the trolls seem to jump out. Well, Joe Biden and the Democrats, they screwed over the rail workers over those sick days. You remember. Except when you look at the vote, and Democrats put a vote in the House to give people those sick days, 207 Republicans voted against it. Or all of them. And this is one of those moments where you go, again, we give corporate America all this power. We give them all of this ability to control what happens to workers on the shop floor and to citizens in their communities. I was thinking about as I was watching the coverage of this explosion in Bedford, Ohio. I was remembering this plant in Texas that we visited, where the basketball hoops at the school were literally blown flat, 90 degree, right on the ground, just right down. The explosion was so great, knocked houses off of foundations, blew the whole back off of a high school, blew a nursing home, the roof completely off. The massive amount of damage done from this explosion. But the company had absolute rights. Oh, it's their right. What about the rights of the others? And what we're seeing by Republican leaders across this country is a move to, well, we can't hold those companies responsible. I point to what's going on in Iowa. And Iowa, what the blank? What is going on in Iowa? There was a story over at FreightWaves, which is the trucking industry, the Industry Insider magazine. They had a story asking a simple question. Should there be laws protecting trucking companies from nuclear verdicts? So when a truck, smashes into something or melts a bridge or whatever, they want to be able to cap what they're calling non-economic damages at $1 million. So if you hit a busload of kids, okay, there's the bus, there's the infrastructure, there's that. But all those people on the bus, the pain and suffering part of this, and all of the life, $1 million tops. And there are places that already have this. They pointed out that Texas has added this layer of protection for trucking companies who are in post-crash litigation, as they put it. And what it does is it increases the standard for filing for finding a trucking company liable for accidents and shifts the responsibility where? Onto the driver. So what they're doing is, again, they're shielding responsibility for the companies. And look, eventually we're going to hear, those workers on the train, they didn't. You're going to hear this, I think, at some point. But this is what happens. I mean, Florida is, I guess, doing the same kind of thing. But this idea that it's not the company's fault and they should be shielded from responsibility, and then going after, it's going to be the truck driver's fault in any crashes. Not the fact that you've run this driver ragged, not the fact that you're pushing and pushing and pushing and knowing that you're pushing. This is one of those moments where we've got to ask ourselves, how far are we willing to protect corporate America at the expense of us? I got to tell you, I think at some point we're going to see just how extreme Republicans are on the side of corporate interests, if it isn't bad enough already. But I'm looking at this Iowa legislation that they want to move through on, and it's House Study Bill 114 for anyone who wants to look it up. When will we hold them accountable? And how much are you willing to, put society at risk? Because understand, it's like this derailment. Whatever the companies don't pick up, whatever external costs are, we're going to bear. And we're going to bear a bunch of this. It's not like, they're going to bill these companies for all of the hours that people lose from work and all of the resources that are going into this and all of the economic and environmental damage. They're going to get out for pennies on the dollar. So when do we say enough of this? When do we go back to saying, we do need sane, rational regulations. We do need a cop on the beat. We need somebody overseeing this. We need people with a voice on the job. Just my thoughts. Want to hear yours. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Gonna take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
The phone lines are open. Give Rick a call at 1-866-416-RICK. That's 1-866-416-7425.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So on President's Day, yes, on President's Day, Republicans calling for civil war. Yeah, what a perfect day to do that. A U.S. president, our commander-in-chief in Kiev on President's Day, in a war zone on President's Day, you have Republicans calling for a civil war and backing a Russian dictator who invaded a sovereign nation. And this is the thing. I had this conversation with a friend today because we're about the same age. We grew up during that era of the Cold War and grew up in mutual assured destruction. We grew up during that time of still having to dive under desks because they're going to drop the big one. We're going to be lobbing nuclear weapons and the end of humanity and all of that. And he goes to me. I just can't fathom how it is that anyone our age or older would side with the Russians. I just don't get it. And I don't either, other than, they hate the same people that they hate. It's that kind of, we're on the same kind of fascistic page. But very weird, especially when the report came out today that evidently some leaked internal strategic documents from Putin's executive office were saying, look, he wants to take over Belarus. There's going to be they're getting the old gang back together, so to speak. So Ukraine is next, and then what happens? Well, then Poland. Yeah, and then what happens? What happens when they do attack a NATO country? The best outcome here is, and I've had this argument with people. Look, I'm not a big war fan. I don't agree with us getting involved in every conflict around the world, but this one has real implications. If Ukraine goes down, there is a move. They're going to go to Poland. I believe that to be the next step. And that's a NATO country. That means we get involved. That means we have to send our young men and women. We have to be into this. So the best possible outcome, Ukraine holds them off and we give them the things that they need to defend themselves. But it's just interesting to listen to the right scream and holler and Marjorie Trainwreck, what's her name, going on about we need a national divorce. You go, what? She tweeted, we need a national divorce. We need to be separated by red states and blue states and shrink the federal government. Everyone I talk to says this. Everyone? From the sick and disgusting woke culture issues shoved down our throats to the Democrats' traitorous America Last policies. We're done. And, this is one of those things that I've talked about before. Because understand, red states are welfare states. They take more money from the federal government than they contribute into the pot. Blue states are funding red states. I'm not calling for the end of the union. I'm not calling for tearing us apart. I would like to see a piece of legislation that says, you don't get more than you put in, and that we then use that other money to, build our infrastructure and do things that we need to do. But you listen to these folks talk about, this civil war idea. Now, she said, this isn't a civil war. It's a divorce. I'm going, really? Is that what the mind is? It's really twisted. But understand, we're not stronger torn apart. We're not stronger as a nation ripping ourselves asunder. We're stronger when we come together. And this is where, again, I love the MGT folks here who always, all these people have bumper stickers saying, love it or leave it. Well, Marjorie, you can gather the sheeple and get the flock out. You can go. No one's holding you here. If you don't like it, go. See how that works? It's pretty simple. Let's go to the phones. Got Alice on one. Alice, how are you?
I'm doing okay. I wanted to comment. I have cousins because my family on the paternal side came from Poland. And I still have relatives, lots of relatives actually, in Zakopane, where my family's from. And my cousins in Zakopane are very leery of what's going on right now with Russia. And they, too, believe that Putin wants to come after them next.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of experts, a lot of global experts who are going, look, this seems to be the pattern. They do want to get the old band back. This is something Putin has talked about in the past. There should be no surprise here. My problem is people our age and older, we lived through the era of a Soviet bloc. I don't know that having that get back together is a great idea.
No, I don't believe so either. And there is a man named Konstantin. He's Russian, and he left Russia back in August, and he has a vlog on YouTube, and he had been saying before he left that he felt that this is what Putin was planning to do And he also believes that Putin's lost his ever-loving mind. So, the consensus seems to be from people that live in the area. They're coming up with the same thing that us people over here
Yeah.
are.
No, and the scarier part of this is, look, once that happens, Russia has no chance. And the only chance that they do have is to start throwing nukes. And that's where things get really ugly and dangerous. In this moment, it's a ground war at this point. We start pushing buttons, it's all bad for everyone. So the best outcome, in my view, and look, I'm not an expert. I've read people and this is others' opinions as well, is that Ukraine is able to stand up for themselves, turn this back, and stop this advancement, and let Russia figure out where they're going to go forward, but not allow Ukraine to fall.
I agree with you. And as for Marjorie Taylor Greene and her divorce, if that would happen, the same thing that happened during the first Civil War. The South, all of a sudden they found out that they had all these economic disasters. But just think of the money the blue states would save. Have a good evening.
Thanks so much, Alice. Appreciate it. No, we're in a weird spot because they're saying it on President's Day. I mean, this is the other part of this. We're taking this moment on President's Day to go, you know what? Isn't it amazing how much she's starting to feel her oats and say what the Q folk really believe? Because this is where we're going. The most extreme of the extreme. Let's deregulate everything. Let the rich and powerful take over. Let's not have any public programs or safety net, or it's really kind of a very interesting future. One I don't know that I want my kids to have to be suffering through. But I do find it interesting that Marjorie and her cabal of crazy on President's Day. I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you miss any portion of the program, make sure you grab the podcast. Wherever you find your favorite podcast, you'll find ours. Quick break, right back. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1917. More than 400 Jewish mothers, many carrying their children, marched on City Hall in New York City. Their cry, which rang out in both Yiddish and English, was, "We want food for our children." On the eve of the U.S. entry into World War I, inflation had sent the cost of food skyrocketing. For example, in 1916, the cost for an average dinner for a medium-sized family was 76 cents. By 1917, the price had more than doubled to $1.99. At a time when families were fortunate to have an income of $40 a month, seeing grocery bills jump from $22 to $59 for the month was more than most families could bear. Working parents could not afford to feed their children. Many were forced to sell family heirlooms and pawn what possessions they had just to survive. The Mothers Anti-High Price League, a socialist-led organization, organized a march in protest of the inflated prices. In the days that followed, boycotts, sometimes violently enforced, targeted food shops accused of price gouging. Some women also attacked customers who visited the boycotted shops. Unfounded rumors swirled that the protests were a German plot. The anti-German hysteria leading up to World War I put the city on edge. By February 24th, thousands of women from all 5 boroughs gathered in Madison Square to protest the high food prices. At the front of the march waved a white flag emblazoned with the single word, starvation. City officials responded by providing cheap food for purchase throughout the city. This provided temporary relief, but did not address the impact of high inflation on food costs. Adequately feeding our nation's children is a problem the U.S. still has not solved. According to a study done in 2012, 1 in 7 households, or more than 17 million people in the United States, faced food insecurity. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
No one needs another outrage to worry about, but here's one that could literally be your last worry. Our hospitals are killing us. Not that the staffers are going room to room snuffing out patients, of course, but hospital owners and top executives are nonetheless killing thousands of ill Americans entrusted to their care. They are doing it by deliberately short-staffing their facilities and short-changing sick and injured people they're richly paid to serve. At the core of this outrage is a fatal structural flaw in our healthcare system, namely that these are no longer our hospitals. Instead of being public or nonprofit entities for the common good, focused squarely on patients, hospitals today tend to be private operations controlled by corporate profiteers. Pitting patients against profits is no way to run a hospital, for it means money will ultimately rule over health and over life itself. Ask a nurse. These dedicated professionals are the solid pillars of American health. More than doctors and way more than administrators, nurses make a hospital function, providing the primary care and constant on-site monitoring that are the essence of an ethical, healthy system. Yet, thousands have already fled the work they love. Another third plan to leave this year, and thousands more are going on strike. Why? Because the profit system demands massive staff cuts, leaving way too few nurses to meet the basic needs of patients, causing burnout among nurses and unnecessary deaths of people they care for. A damning 2021 study revealed that forcing fewer nurses to tend to an ever larger caseload effectively killed more than 4,000 New York hospital patients in the previous 2 years alone. This is Jim Hightower saying, yet the corporate powers insist on treating nurses as just a cost to be cut, arguing that hospitals must have staffing flexibility. In other words, cut nurses, raise profits.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So last week we talked about this Packers Sanitation Services Incorporated story about how, again, we're making child labor great again. Moving back to the good old days when, those kids with the really small hands could get into those small places, clean those blades for, cutting the brisket and processing meat and doing the little hands do great work. And states like Iowa, what is going on in Iowa? They're trying to make child labor great again. And again, this is what happens when you cut down on immigrant labor coming in. You need cheap exploitable labor somehow. Where are we going to get it? We're going to get it from the grade schools. Here to share some thoughts on that most recent story and where we're going as a country, I've asked Jordan Barab to come talk with us. Jordan's a former acting assistant secretary and deputy assistant secretary of labor at OSHA during the Obama years. He's also one of my go-to guys on anything health and safety. His blog, jordanbarab.com/confined space, a must read. Jordan, thanks for taking time for us.
Glad to be here, Rick. Thanks for inviting me.
So I'm looking at this story, and we've seen a bunch of these recently coming, especially out of the meatpacking industry, where you've got these kids, working the overnight shift. 13, 14, 15 years old before they go into school in the morning. And now we're really trying to put this in the legislation in places like Iowa. This is a major step backwards that I don't think most people are paying as much attention to. I'm curious your thoughts.
Yeah, according to some of the legislators in Iowa and some other states, the solution to child labor is more child labor. I think what we're seeing here is kind of a corporate response to the labor shortage, that came out of COVID and people quitting jobs and, organizing their workplaces. They're looking, as you said, for more vulnerable workers that they can underpay and who won't complain. And who's more vulnerable than a child? And especially when you look at PSSI, these were not just children. These were children of immigrants, many of whom didn't even speak English. So, they didn't know what they were doing. They didn't know, how to complain. I mean, you can't get much more vulnerable than that population.
Yeah, isn't that the point, though? I mean, when you stop and look at it, when in fact, we've had J.D. Scholten, a state representative from Iowa, and Sammy Sheets, another rep from Iowa, on to talk about this legislation. And, I had to say, look, those aren't going to be my kids doing those jobs. Those are going to be poor and extremely poor working class kids, mostly going to be immigrants and people of color. Not going to be my kids or yours.
No, exactly. Yeah, our kids are going to do internships or, babysit or, work at grocery stores. I mean, there's, work is good for kids. I worked when I was a kid, but I didn't work at dangerous jobs, and these kids shouldn't be working at dangerous jobs either. And the jobs, these PSSI jobs, these jobs cleaning the meat packing plants, are the most dangerous jobs that exist in industry. You're constantly seeing, I mean, grown-ups getting killed and maimed and limbs amputated in these jobs. It's just beyond belief that they would have kids working in these jobs.
Yeah, from the labor Department of Labor's report, it said children were working with hazardous chemicals and cleaning meat processing equipment, including back saws, brisket saws, and head splitters. I got to be honest. I don't know that's not just getting a job for a little extra money to learn work ethic. That's real dangerous kind of work.
It's dangerous work. Yeah, it doesn't pay well, but obviously, they need the money. I should say their families need the money. It's not unlikely some of their families may be undocumented workers, and they aren't going to complain either that their children are being abused. They need the money. Again, these are exploitable, vulnerable kids.
Now, this is just the extreme. I've been talking about this for a while, that we're headed on a path to go back to the good old days of the Lochner era, where if you're hungry enough and desperate enough to work for poverty wages in deplorable conditions, that's your right, buddy. It's your liberty. It's your liberty to go out and put yourself in dangerous conditions for poverty wages. Only we're going to update it to freedom, because that's the new buzzword. Am I off base here? Because I got to tell you, everywhere I look, things not go in the right direction in my view.
No, exactly. And things are getting worse. To the extent that you have many of these companies, they're subcontractors of the big companies. So the big companies are basically subcontracting out the responsibility for health and safety. They're subcontracting out, any chance of getting a union. This is what, David Weil, who used to be head of Wage and Hour Department of Labor under the Obama administration, calls the fissured workplace. Nobody's actually working for the main company anymore. Everybody's working for a subcontractor or some kind of, temporary firm or something like that. And that makes it, very difficult these days for agencies like OSHA or for Wage and Hour to enforce the law, because you're basically enforcing 20th century laws in a 21st century workplace. They don't match. The laws need to be updated. These agencies are terribly underfunded. They're tiny. Wage and Hour's budget is something like $250 million. OSHA's is only about between $600 and $700 million. These are tiny, tiny budgets for the federal government. For these agencies that have responsibility for working conditions and fair wages and safety conditions all over the country, for every workplace in the country. It's absurd.
Oh, it's interesting, as I've had a couple people reach out to me and say there's some grand conspiracy, there's some nefarious plot. The end times are near because, look, we had an explosion. There's an explosion today in Bedford, Ohio. There was another explosion over the weekend at at ArcelorMittal there in the Warren Coke plant. You've got the thing going on in East Palestine. All of this, and I'm going, no, this isn't some nefarious plot. This is what deregulation gets us. This is what corporate America policing themselves get us. And just because we're now paying attention doesn't mean this is new. You know as well as anyone, this stuff happens quite frequently. It just never rises to the level that we pay attention.
Exactly. Unless a whole lot of workers are killed at one time or a whole community is poisoned, nobody pays much attention to it, and nothing changes. It's only when there's a major catastrophe, really, that there's potential for change in these agencies' budgets and these agencies' laws. We hope something, good can come out of that. We've seen the right wing, going after Biden for this and going after Pete Buttigieg and that type of thing. I'd like to see them, if they really want to do something, all the MAGA people, get in line and support higher budgets for EPA, higher budgets for OSHA, for Wage and Hour, and strengthening the regulations and updating the laws.
And actually putting some teeth in the laws, not just EPA, OSHA, but also the National Labor Relations Board. There should be some actual penalties when you break the law. And I'm looking at what Norfolk Southern is doing right now. They're going around and said, hey, we're going to give everybody in the zip code $1,000. Look how wonderful we are doing this self-imposed fine thing. And you find out there's only like 8,000 people in the entire zip code. So it's not really costing them anything, but it is a great PR stunt.
Yeah, and PSSI only got fined $1.5 million for this whole child labor thing, and this is to PSSI is owned by Blackstone, which is a huge company, a huge limited equity firm, and it doesn't even make a dent. The same with any kind of OSHA fines, hardly even make a dent, in the budgets, bottom lines of large companies.
Yeah, we talked about this last week about how paltry these fines are. I think it was like $15,000 for each one of these violations. And you brought up a moment ago that these third-party logistics companies and these headhunters, these staffing services, you know, these are folks who I think a lot of this stuff actually gets made able to have happen because, well, it's not our fault that the company sent us these people, because I was looking at the numbers of this PSSI group. There were 3 places that had like 22, 26, and
Yeah,
27 workers in it. And you go, that's not an accident. That's an on purpose. There's a headhunter out there bringing those kids, recruiting those kids to go into that factory. Maybe 1 or 2 you can get away with going, oh, we didn't know. But when you got 22, 26, or 27, that was planned, that was schemed. They did that on purpose.
Yeah, and you've got these huge companies like JBS and Cargill who are, shocked that this is going on, in their plants. And even PSSI is shocked. They can't believe that, they're actually doing this. And yet they did everything they could not to cooperate with wage and hour. But nevertheless, they had allegedly had no idea this was going on.
Yeah. So what's the answer, Jordan? I mean, going forward, there's a lot of problems out here. As I've been focusing on the fact that, we have very different views politically. My friends on the right believe there should be no regulations. Let the corporations police themselves because they're going to act in their best interest. Is that I see that as a failed ideology. I'm curious where you find yourself on that thought.
Well, as you say, Rick, I mean, this is what capitalism is. I mean, corporations obviously want to maximize their profits, and that's the way the system works. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But to go along with that, you need regulation. You need a government presence there to actually control what would otherwise be just uncontrolled exploitation of the workforce and of consumers, for that matter. So you need, as I mentioned before, you need to modernize the laws. Now, that's obviously not going to happen too soon, the way our political situation is. You need to increase agency funding. As I said, these agencies are tiny. You need to mandate corporate responsibility. And what I mean by that is that the big companies need to be also responsible for the crimes of their subcontractors. And the temporary firms need to also be responsible, for the host employers and vice versa. Now, OSHA's been doing some of that and holding both sides responsible, but it's really hard when you have these subcontracting, arrangements. You can't really hold the companies at the top vulnerable with the laws that we have right now. But probably more important, you really need to educate and empower these vulnerable workers. OSHA has this very small, but has a grant program where they're training, unions and other worker organizations who actually have access to these workers, because OSHA can't reach these workers, but churches and other organizations can reach these workers. So they need to be trained, they need to be empowered, they need to understand what the hazards are, how to complain about them, and they need to be protected, especially if they're undocumented, because even undocumented workers legally deserve the same protection that documented workers do. And finally, of course, you need more unions in these places. I mean, again, the whole process of subcontracting and everything, one of the reasons for that is to get rid of unions. The main company may be unionized, but they don't want to unionize the people that are actually cleaning the place, because they don't have to pay them well, they don't have to take care of their health and safety. They get away with a hell of a lot. If parts of their plant, especially the most dangerous parts of the work in these places, are not unionized.
Yeah. Now, the interesting thing is, since you brought that up, is I have a friend who was one of these headhunters, worked for a staffing agency, and he said it was interesting how they would ask for people to come in, and then almost immediately they were put into the most dangerous jobs because they weren't their employees. They were just people that they churned through. And this is 10, 15 years ago. I can't imagine how much worse it's gotten.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the other thing, Rick, I mean, you mentioned this at the beginning, but, there are not thousands, but probably millions of workers just over the border, or even in this country, that are still undocumented, that would love to have these jobs. I mean, we don't really have we don't need to have a labor shortage here if we don't want a labor shortage. There's plenty of workers out there that'll do these jobs, ideally, for better wages and better benefits and more protections. But, this whole idea there's a labor shortage when we could have a reasonable immigration system is just ridiculous.
You listen to the Rick Smith Show here with Jordan Barab, former acting Assistant Secretary and Deputy Assistant Secretary of Labor for OSHA during the Obama years. He's also my go-to guy on health and safety stuff. Check out his website, jordanbarab.com/confined space. We'll get links out on social media how you can take a look at that. Now, I want to get some of your thoughts on what we saw happen out in East Palestine. I mean, we find out that these trains are getting bigger, they're heavier, the load distributions are different. They want fewer people on the trains. It just seems like all of the the push to not regulate them, to not make them change, to not make them spend the billions and billions of dollars they're spending on stock buybacks and enriching themselves hasn't filtered down to safety. Is this a moment where we hold someone accountable, or is this just another one of those moments where it's in the news for a couple of days? Once the flames go down, we forget about it until the next time. I'm curious how you see this playing out.
Well, I think that's something we need to make sure it isn't forgotten. No, you're right. I mean, this is we started to look at this problem during the labor issues in the fall when there was almost a strike with railroad workers, and you have this new phenomenon which you kind of mentioned, which is called precision scheduled railroading, where they're trying to cut costs everywhere. Now, in the fall, we focused on the fact that precision scheduled railroading didn't allow for any kind of sick leave time for workers. And everybody said, oh, that's too bad, but we can't have a strike. Well, the thing with precision scheduled railroading is it not only cuts back on workers, time off and on sick leave, it also cuts back on maintenance. It makes for longer trains, as you said. One-man train crews, that's what the railroads would like to have, one man, and ultimately they probably want nobody on the train. They'd like no staff. They'd like it completely automated, which is absurd when you have these trains that are 1.5 and 2 miles long. First of all, to have one person on these trains, the bearings on this train, who knows how far back started burning. That's supposedly, what led to the thing in East Palestine. I mean, what do? You're an engineer. You're the only one on the train. You stop the train and walk back for 1.5 miles to see what's going on. If you talk to any railroaders these days, they aren't surprised that this happened. They're surprised that it hadn't happened yet and that it wasn't worse. And we saw a lot worse. You may remember, almost 10 years ago in Lac Megantic in Canada, when a train, again, a very poorly maintained train, only one person on it, the train stalled on a hill. They told the guy to go to a hotel. They'd fix it. The train caught fire. The brakes let loose. It came rolling down into this town of Lac Megantic at a huge speed, carrying all kinds of crude oil, derailed, crashed, exploded, and killed 47 people in that town, destroyed the whole downtown. I mean, that's the kind of thing we're going to be looking at more and more now with this precision scheduled railroading and constantly cutting back on maintenance, making the trains longer, and cutting back on staff.
Yeah, but again, you look at this, and this is another example of what we've allowed to have happen across industry. This mass consolidation, where I understand, in the '80s there were upwards of 40 different train companies. Now we got 6.
Yeah.
With this kind of consolidation, this kind of enormous amount of profit that they then use to spin into lobbying operations to push back on any regulations or any changes, they seem to hold all the cards because we're told. And again, I have my conservative friends who tell me all the time, they're going to do what's in their best interest. So they don't want these kind of disasters because they don't want to have to spend the money. So they're going to do the right thing. And I'm going, I don't buy that on any level.
No. And we saw the hazmat railroad regulations weakened somewhat during the Obama administration even, and then Trump, of course, just eliminated them. So the requirement for better brakes where you have hazmat on these cars, better hazmat cars on every car that's carrying hazmat, all of that basically went away. So you've got not only not stronger regulations, which you need, especially with this precision scheduled railroading, but you actually have weaker regulations than we should be having anyway. It's going totally in the wrong direction. And it's going to lead to more and more of these disasters and worse ones.
Yeah. Last question I've got for you, last line of questioning, because we're looking at the response, and all I keep hearing, and look, I give Republicans credit in this moment because they're putting all the blame on Pete Buttigieg, they're putting all the blame on Joe Biden, all the blame's on the government response to this, and it seems like Norfolk Southern's getting kind of away with what happened. They're going to give out $1,000 to every resident in the zip code. So look at how wonderful they are. What is your assessment of the government response to what we saw? I mean, you're someone who's worked inside of government. You know how the sausage is made and the wheels turn. What are your thoughts of how the response went?
Well, I think the response is going probably as well as it can. I mean, what happens in these situations is once the incident happens, then EPA is in charge with response, cleaning things up, testing the air, testing the water, and they were right in there doing that. It's the NTSB in this case to investigate the causes, and they're right in there doing it. Buttigieg has been getting all the blame on this, but in one sense, once the incident has happened, there's nothing they can do. Their job is to keep things from happening in the first place, and obviously, it's not just it's Congress and also allowing the laws and the agency able to issue regulations. But on the other hand, I mean, this does call. I mean, there's the phrase "never let a good catastrophe go to waste," right? This is a moment where you can look at corporate responsibility, you can look at the lack of government regulation, the lack of funding for the enforcement agencies, and do something about it. And what I see lacking here is some kind of leadership there, pointing us in that direction, taking advantage of this catastrophe, if you will. And that could have been something, for example, the president could have been doing. It certainly could have been something Buttigieg could have been doing, even if he didn't necessarily have a responsibility in the specific response. Instead, we're kind of letting the right wing take over this, which is bad because they don't have any solutions. Their only solution to this whole thing is to fire Buttigieg. They're not talking about increasing regulations, increasing EPA's budget, making tighter regulations for rail safety. All that. I mean, ask them what their solutions are. You won't hear anything except fire Buttigieg and impeach Biden.
Yeah, it's all about the division. It's all about the distraction. Whereas we should be looking at how do we make sure this doesn't happen again to another community. And end it right here. But again, this is where we are politically in these polar camps, and all we do is lob bombs at each other. But Jordan, I appreciate the time as always. Hope folks will take a look at your website, jordanbarab.com/confined space. We'll get links out on social media. You can take a look at that. Highly suggested. Jordan, appreciate the time, man.
All right. Thanks for inviting me, Rick.
Look forward to talking to you again. Again, jordanbarab.com/confined space. Gonna take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
The phone lines are open. Give Rick a call at 1-866-416-RICK. That's 1-866-416-7425.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1937. That was the day the National Lawyers Guild held their first convention in the nation's capital. The Guild was established as a way to bring together progressive lawyers dedicated to fighting for basic and progressive change in our political and economic system, and to assure that human rights be regarded as more sacred than property interests. Members were admitted regardless of race, sex, or political beliefs. The early Guild stood up for FDR's New Deal reforms like a full Social Security program against the staunch opposition of the American Bar Association. From its inception, protecting the rights of working people has been an important effort for the Guild. At the first convention, they passed a resolution supporting the rights of working people to organize and collectively bargain. Guild lawyers supported the founding of both the United Auto Workers and the Congress of Industrial Organizations. They also stood up for civil rights, adopting an anti-lynching resolution at their first convention. During the civil rights era, they provided legal aid for activists and fought for voting rights. This made them a target during the 1950s Cold War anti-communist hysteria. The FBI targeted the Guild for investigation. By 1955, the Guild had dropped to just 500 members. In the 1970s, the Guild successfully sued to find out the extent of FBI spying. They discovered that 1,000 informants had generated FBI files of 400,000 pages on the Guild and its members. Despite this harassment, the Guild has kept up its fight for working people. The organization has opposed anti-worker legislation from Taft-Hartley to the passage of NAFTA. In 2012, the Guild celebrated its 75th anniversary stronger than ever.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
So get ready for the next conspiracy theory. Get ready for it. It's coming. The Q folk are already out spinning the next yarn. The greatest thing, someone emailed me and sent me the greatest response to the Q folks. It's basically hillbilly Scientology. So, coming out of the hillbilly Scientology brigade, the balloon, the big balloon, the big Chinese spy balloon. What if the big balloon that was hovering over Montana, secret stuff? What if that balloon wasn't a Chinese balloon after all, oh no, what if it was Joe Biden and Hunter Biden? What if it was the Bidens? What if it was a super duper secret executive order? Yeah, they are that crazy. One of the theories that's being thrown out there is that this was Biden, because they said, this group of Human Events, it's a right-wing publication. They wrote that one theory is that Biden is bought and paid for by communist Chinese. While it's true that Biden and the other officials are certainly compromised by the Chinese, what if the balloon had nothing to do with China? What if the Chinese spy balloon was actually a U.S. spy balloon? What if the administration's insistence that it was Chinese was actually a convenient narrative to hide an almost even more alarming secret? Joe Biden spying on you. Oh my gosh. Yeah, this is coming. It is coming. I guarantee you, Marjorie Three Names and the rest of them, there will be a hearing when they start doing their traveling road shows. It's coming. It is coming. Now, what's interesting is, again, while Marjorie Three Names is calling for a divorce, the country to divorce, it's interesting that whenever something bad happens, who do they turn to? They turn to the federal government. Now, I also find it interesting that you get, these Republican representatives like this Randy Feenstra, Iowa's 4th congressional district representative, who tweeted out that American families continue to suffer from President Biden's wasteful spending. By flooding our economy with $6 trillion, he fueled record inflation and caused paychecks to shrink. Under Speaker McCarthy's leadership, we'll restore fiscal responsibility in Congress. Now, understand, the money hasn't already been spent yet. So this idea that we've spent all this money hasn't been spent yet. And this money that hasn't been spent yet is somehow contributing to inflation is just lunacy. And I find it amazing, utterly amazing, that cutting taxes massively for the very wealthy and for big corporations, adding to our debt, was good. I find that extremely hard to believe that that's good. By giving rich people more and corporate America more while taking from the working class is good, but investing in infrastructure, investing in healthcare, investing in things for working people like education, investing in feeding children, somehow that's wasteful and inflationary. What planet do these people live on? And is there a point where lying is ever negative in their world? I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com.
This morning we declared a national emergency for only the 3rd time in our history.
Back-to-back extreme weather disasters trigger national state of emergency in New Zealand.
There's many, many ways in which the ice can change, and we're seeing all of them.
New studies find global warming is melting Antarctica's ice. Plus,
this train apparently was not considered a high hazardous material train. This is absurd.
Growing concerns about safety for residents near Ohio chemical train derailment.
All of those concerns and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
So where's the EPA? If they say my plastic straw is destroying this country, then they must be all over a cancer-causing gas bomb in the Ohio River Valley, right?
Really what we have to do is we have to make sure that our rails are safe.
Wait a minute. Why is Fox News and Marjorie Taylor Greene suddenly concerned about the EPA and toxic train spills? We'll discuss. And no, they don't say your plastic straw is destroying this country. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, this is very, very strange. It's like someone flipped a switch. Everybody over on Fox News is suddenly concerned about this train derailment and disaster in Ohio. Why is that?
Well, I think it's following a familiar pattern. Right-wing media and Republican politicians are attempting to exploit a disaster for political gain, claiming that rural white conservatives are basically being persecuted by the government's response to the Ohio train derailment.
It's those poor white people who are getting it again. I see why Fox News all of a sudden gives a damn. They're usually not concerned about the EPA. And by the way, it was Trump who rolled back Obama's safety regulations on trains that might have prevented this disaster.
Exactly. So to update, concerns are growing about safety for residents returning to their homes in the aftermath of that fiery, toxic chemical train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio, nearly 2 weeks ago. Ohio officials have told residents to use bottled water until testing confirms that their local water supply is safe. In a press conference, Republican Ohio Governor Mike DeWine called it absurd that the train cars were marked non-hazardous despite their toxic cargo. DeWine called on Congress to tighten regulations for trains carrying hazardous substances, seemingly unaware that the Trump administration rolled back multiple train safety rules at the railroad industry's request, including requirements for safer braking systems.
Unaware or would just like to not notice?
As of airtime, DeWine has not requested a formal disaster declaration from President Biden to release more federal resources, contradicting baseless right-wing media claims of a lackluster federal response. In New Zealand, just weeks after record rainfall triggered deadly flooding in Auckland, a massive cyclone, Gabrielle, this week caused widespread destruction across the North Island, triggering floods and landslides, collapsing buildings, and destroying transportation, power, and communications infrastructure. New Zealand Prime Minister Chris Hipkins declared a national emergency for only the third time in the country's history. New Zealand's Climate Minister, James Shaw, blasted the New Zealand Parliament for its delays.
I don't think I've ever felt as sad or as angry about the lost decades that we spent bickering and arguing about whether climate change was real or not, whether it was caused by humans or not, whether it was bad or not, whether we should do something about it or not, because it is clearly here now. And if we do not act, it will get worse.
New Zealand is just having a terrible, terrible time with this. 2 major disasters in just the last few weeks.
Yes, it's very difficult to recover from that. At the South Pole, the amount of floating sea ice encircling Antarctica has reached the lowest level ever recorded for the second year in a row since the satellite era began in 1979. That's according to the National Snow and Ice Data Center. In a different study, scientists trying to understand how quickly ice in Antarctica is melting say they encountered, quote, an eerily warm ocean, and found that the warming ocean and marine heat waves are eroding coastal ice shelves and carving up the underside of the important Thwaites Glacier, with major implications for rising sea levels.
Yeah, like enough ice, if it melts, it'll raise the sea levels by about 2 feet around the world.
Finally, a bit of good news. Your next washing machine and refrigerator will be much cheaper to operate in a few years thanks to new energy efficiency rules proposed by the U.S. Department of Energy, the first efficiency upgrade to major appliances in more than 10 years. Once finalized, the agency says the new efficiency rules will reduce carbon emissions and collectively save Americans about $3.5 billion a year on energy and water bills.
Oh, let the complaining begin on Fox News of how they're coming to take away their washing machines. Or something. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com.
Are you tired of think tank approved corporate news and commentary? Are you tired of CEOs telling you what to think, who to hate, and who to vote for? Well, welcome to the Rick Smith Show. We don't take orders from some boardroom, and we don't do focus groups or talking points. We don't work for them, and we never will. I'm Rick Smith, and I work for you. Join us daily at thericksmithshow.com and download the podcast and never miss a minute.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
I'm still fixated on this Marjorie Trainwreck Green tweet of calling for a national divorce. And again, immediately I came out and said, look, you know, the reality is there should be a conversation on how red states are welfare states, taking more money from the federal government than blue states do. There's a huge, massive redistribution of wealth. Maybe we should be talking about that. And immediately I got people, well, you wouldn't eat and all this, all kinds of craziness. Now, I'm not advocating for civil war, which is kind of what Marjorie 3 names. At least I see that as it's kind of what she's doing by calling, we need to be separated by red states and blue states. No, we just need to get rid of crazy people. And do you remember when crazy people used to go, you love it or leave it? Well, you know, Marjorie, gather your sheeple and get the flock out. pretty simple. Here to share some thoughts on, is there a possibility of a national divorce? What the hell is that? I've asked our good friend Carolyn Fiddler to come talk with us. Carolyn is the political editorial director over at Courier Newsroom, couriernewsroom.com, the website. Carolyn, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me back. It's been a while.
So, political divorce, a divorce. We're a national divorce. We're gonna split up neighborhoods. We're gonna do some creative drawing to get red states and blue states, again, pitting us against each other. Is that possible?
I mean, we did try it once. It didn't work out so well. And I think enough people actually studied legit history before they're, before the current wave of Republican efforts to sort of erase history teaching from our schools. I don't know if people remember that was a bad thing that did not work out very well, and we should not do that again. We're a united set of states. It's kind of our thing.
Yeah, but you still got those people, the losers, who they're still a little chafe. That war of northern aggression, Carolyn. They want a rematch.
No one wants that, and I don't think that would work out too well for them, honestly.
No, I don't think it worked out for us at all. And just to have this is the thing that gets me, to have a national figure like her. Look, for some idiot to spew this on Twitter or social media is one thing, but to have someone with the platform and the power of a sitting congresswoman, this is dangerous talk, because this filters down to the mouth breathers and the folks sitting on their toilets with their mouth open doing their research by watching YouTube videos of this moron saying, we need a national divorce. That filters
and it normalizes
down.
it. It's terrifying. We can't normalize this kind of conversation. Like it's it's a free country for the time being. People are allowed to say what they want, but it does normalize this kind of extremist talk, and that is absolutely very scary.
And what I say it does is it provides cover for all the really ugly stuff that's happening in the states.
Exactly.
I look at Iowa and I keep going, Iowa, how did you get so crazy? When we did our Working Class Heroes tour, we went all around Iowa. I think we traveled to all four corners and everywhere in between. And I remember J.D. Scholten, who is now a state representative, saying, it was talk radio that radicalized, and cable news that turned Iowa from a solid, moderate, Democratic, working class state to a bunch of raving lunatics, right-wing lunatics. And I look at the legislation that's being proposed in their house. It's insane.
It is. It really is.
This idea that we're going to make child labor great again by letting 13-year-olds clean the head splitters on the kill floor of the meatpacking plant is literally insane.
It is. I mean, I feel like that's probably a good way to create a whole generation of vegetarians, but also it is objectively terrible and should not happen. But actually, weirdly, in Virginia, a bill recently got killed. They were a member was trying to have it so if you were working in the workforce under 18, you get paid like $3 less an hour than someone 18 years older.
Crap too. Yeah,
it's wild.
We need training wages, as if minimum wage isn't low enough already.
Oh my God, yes.
We need training wages. But then again, listen, I remember Ron Paul running on the platform that people should make $1 an hour. If you're willing to work for it, they should be allowed to pay it. If you're desperate enough, and so I keep saying, they're trying to push us back to the Lochner era, where if you're hungry enough and desperate enough to work for poverty wages in deplorable conditions, it's your liberty, Carolyn. It's your freedom.
I like the freedom to not starve and be able to have a roof over my head. That feels like freedom as well.
No, and this is the weird part of where we are in this country, where you have these voices like Marjorie Three Names or Lauren Boebert, who tweeted out today, what do Target, Capital One, Amazon, Nike, and Intel all have in common? Now, she said they ditched their inclusion and diversity and equity programs because they need more profit. I'm like, they pay lower taxes than their workers. That's what we should be talking about, not this nonsense that, again, to divide and pit us against each other. They're literally robbing us blind.
Yeah, that's exactly what they want to do. Like, look at what's happening over here, so you don't pay attention to my hand in your pocket. And this has been, the sad thing is this has been a long time coming. Like, these people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Boebert started popping up in legislatures in the early teens, and they, trickled up through the system. State legislatures get positions of power in your caucus, and then you run for, say, Congress. And it was really only kind of a matter of time until we got here, unfortunately. And here we are.
No, I mean the thing is look, you've always had a lunatic curer there. You always had the guy who was screaming on the street corner, standing on the soapbox, screaming, by himself. The problem is these people have multiplied. They've organized, and they're not just one or two fringe characters. They've literally, well, look what they did to the speaker. What's his name, McCarthy, and going through that debacle. And look what they're bringing legislatively in states across this country. Again, I go back to this idea: Iowa, what the blank are you doing? We're going to make child labor great again. We're gutting education. Ohio, for instance, they just proposed the Republicans' first legislation: cut taxes on the rich and property taxes, and cut $1.2 billion from education. Really?
Yeah. They just, I mean, they've wanted to destroy public education since time out of mind, it feels like, but they're actually closer to doing it now than they ever have been before. And that is incredibly scary.
Now, you guys at Courier Newsroom spend an awful lot of time in states, and a lot of them that we've got affiliates in, Wisconsin and other places, that are running bad legislation. What's the most, right now, what should we be paying attention to? What's the most egregious thing that's going on right now?
Woo. That is actually a tough question, just because there's so much to choose from. I think the concerted effort, I think two things come instantly to mind to me out of the, myriad pieces of bad legislation moving out there, but the anti-LGBTQ bills, a lot of it is centered around transgender students, but it's, trickling all the way up and down. The age ranges really, they're doing the divide and conquer in that way, like pitting just human beings against each other. Like, look at this scary person who doesn't look like you and doesn't think like you. You should be afraid of them. They're a monster. Like, that's what they're doing. So it's harder to come together and fight back against them. And also the pervasive, ongoing, escalating effort to just ruin education, and specifically like history education in schools. So
I look at Florida.
Don't know that we've been here before and we don't want to go back. It was bad. It is bad. Racism is bad. It's not a controversial concept, but they don't want it being taught in schools.
Well, it'll make us feel bad. Well, our little feelings will be hurt. Remember when they were calling everybody snowflakes for
right? Like, who's a snowflake now? Like, I'm fine. Like, come on.
Yeah, no, look, when back in 2015, we on the program did a multi-state tour of southern states where wherever they treated black people poorly, they've built a museum. There's a new institute, or the lunch counter in Greensboro, North Carolina. It's the Woolworths Institute. I forget what it's actually called, but you could go to the actual Woolworth counter where the A&T 4 were treated horribly, and now it's a museum, and there's tourism around it. Going, look how bad we were. That to me is kind of an education thing. Maybe if we couch this in different terms, maybe if we stop calling it education and called it tourism, maybe we could then teach the next generation a little bit. Maybe they could profit from our kids learning from something. Maybe that's the way forward.
They're already trying to do that. They're trying to destroy public education and give it all to private schools and charter schools. And so they're not taking their foot off the gas pedal in any respect when it comes to this stuff.
Yeah.
It's really hard to choose just two of the worst things. So.
No, it's frightening on a whole bunch of levels. But back to the trans thing, I don't proclaim to have the right answer or any answer. I don't know how I would react, but I do know one thing without question: a government of radical religious zealots, probably not the group I want making a choice for my child. I'm just kind of throwing that out there.
That's for sure. And these people just want to exist. They just want to like live a life as themselves. And like, why can't you just like leave people alone and let people do that? Like, why is that suddenly so difficult? I remember, we remember back when, Republicans were the party of smaller government.
Remember that? It's hard. It's hard to go back that far. Less intrusive government, get big government out of our lives. And yet every time I turn around, they're proposing something to put themselves in the most intimate portions of our lives.
Yeah.
And again, I come back to, I want government doing things. I want them regulating trains, for instance. I would like them to regulate health and safety, for instance. I would like them to make sure that dust levels are such that they don't explode manufacturing facilities. I would like them to do those, make sure the air and the water and the food. I don't want them in my bedroom. I don't want them in my kid's bedroom. I think that's a fair balance. No.
I completely agree. Like whatever happened, and just like a little bit of privacy for everybody. Just that person doing their thing doesn't affect you. So just leave them the hell alone. Why is that suddenly so hard?
No, it's crazy. Now, President's Day, obviously, you're in the, what do they call Virginia? The mother of
the
presidents?
Mother of Presidents. Oh, yeah.
It's kind of a cheat. It's kind of a cheat because you
not.
had 3 of the first 4. So you had kind of a huge head start, no?
Right, but there were other colonies at the time too, and other like first, early states. Like it just, it didn't have to just be people from Virginia. Like
but nobody wanted to drive that far. There were no superhighways back then.
But the capital wasn't even in D.C. until a couple of at least 2 of those first 3 were gone. So, like they still had to commute. It would have been easier if they'd been from New York, probably,
or Philadelphia.
Yes.
So it is that, but this is one of these things where I'm looking at Marjorie Three Names and her declaration of a national divorce, while our commander-in-chief, our president, is in Kiev in a war-torn area on the national stage. It seems. It doesn't seem very patriotic. It doesn't seem very America first. It doesn't seem very rhetoric based on their side. And also, it does kind of that bumper sticker I see every conservative have plastered on the back of their car, which is, what happened to love it or leave it?
Yeah, rhetoric changes, attitudes haven't changed. They just kind of shift perspective a little bit. Like they're saying the same thing in a different way.
So now we talk about all the horrible, and you're listening to the Rick Smith Show here with Carolyn Fiddler. Carol's the political editorial director over at Courier Newsroom, couriernewsroom.com, the website. Highly suggest taking a look at it. They've got publications all over the country. Your state probably going to be one of them, Wisconsin, here in Pennsylvania, Iowa, other states. Make sure that you check them out. All right there, couriernewsroom.com. So, but we're talking about all the horrible. There's got to be some good stuff going on, no? Something? Anything? We named a post office after someone decent. There's got to be some victory. There's got to be some winning somewhere, no?
Well, Virginia is about to send its first Black woman to Congress. So that would be very exciting for Virginians.
As long as we can get somebody who's not crazy, I'm good with that.
Jennifer McClellan, she's currently a state senator. She's going to be an amazing member of Congress. Like I've known her since even before she was in the legislature, because I'm an old person now. I remember when she was a lobbyist, and she's an incredible human being and an incredible lawmaker, and I think she's going to be a person to watch, certainly on the national stage.
No, that's good. I mean, that's something positive, right? Now, how do we build on that? How do we take that and go, maybe we get some less crazy people in other places?
Well, Virginia is one of the few states with state legislative elections this year. And so hopefully Democrats in Virginia can flip that House back to a Democratic majority and keep and expand their majority in the state Senate. And instead of doing things like they've been doing all year this year, which is just Democrats blocking terrible Republican bills come out of the House and Republicans killing good Democratic legislation that comes out of the Senate. So we end up with a bit of a status quo. But hopefully we can move back to actually making progress, like, raising the minimum wage in Virginia finally after all those years, protecting abortion, working to repeal the unconstitutional ban on same-sex marriage in the state constitution, things like that, like little things.
Little tiny things.
Like basic rights.
Yeah, like basic rights. For instance, I'm looking at Michigan, and I'm guardedly optimistic about Michigan. There's some really good things that potentially are going to happen, I'm hoping. I think their governor's not crazy. I think their legislature's got their head on the right path. If we can get that whole no rights at work thing repealed and give people the right to collectively bargain and help strengthen unions to help families do better, I think that's a good start. Democrats actually doing something positive for working people. What could be bad with that?
I mean, I think for obvious reasons, like gun safety legislation has rocketed to the top of the priority list in Michigan, but their next priority really should be strengthening workers' rights there, because not only is that just good for your average human being, but in a more utilitarian sense, it actually also helps build progressive and democratic power in states. Not having right to work laws, having strong union structures is helpful to the democratic infrastructure, frankly. So I hope they are not so short-sighted that they don't prioritize that appropriately.
No, there's so much going on. There's so much bad, and it's easy to go, you know what? I'm just going to put my head in the sand and run away. Because again, I look at Iowa. Oh my God! Yeah. I look at Texas right now. Florida. They're trying to move legislation to shield trucking companies from being sued, for big claims. You start going, what's going on here?
I think things are going to get worse before they get better. Unfortunately, I do. Maybe I'm a Pollyanna. I do think they'll get better. Politics is a little cyclical that way, but I worry that they're going to get worse before they do.
Got to ask you about the train.
Actually hurt a lot of real human beings. So, and also for anyone watching, this is Nebula. She is a very progressive cat.
There you go. Last question I've got for you: the train. Got to get some thoughts on the train. Where are you on the response to by the administration to the train? I know you got the Republicans who finally figured out there was a train wreck. We'd been talking about it for like over a week, and then one day Republicans go, "Oh, train wreck! A way to attack Pete Buttigieg and Biden." Wow, now it's all we hear about.
Yeah.
Did you hear the Chinese balloon might not be a Chinese balloon? It might be an American spy balloon. This is what's coming out of the hillbilly Scientologists over at Q. Yeah, fun.
Oh gosh, wow. I mean, Republicans will look for. I mean, they see that Buttigieg is a rising star in the party. He's definitely not anywhere near done with his political career, and he's smart. And I think they're afraid of him, so they're trying to, defang him. And obviously, Republicans don't want Joe Biden to get reelected, so let's take every opportunity to hammer him as well. It's not. They don't care about the people in Ohio. They don't care about people who live in that town or anywhere around it. They don't care about the environment. They just care about power, and that's what Republicans do so consistently better than Democrats.
Sadly, you are correct. CareerNewsroom.com, the website. Carolyn Fiddler, political editorial director. Appreciate the time. As always, such fun talking with you.
Likewise. Thanks for having me on.
Good stuff. Right back with your thoughts. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
The phone lines are open. Give Rick a call at 1-866-416-RICK. That's 1-866-416-7425.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So I think it's interesting that Carolyn brought up the transgender issue because, we've been hearing a lot of things about bathrooms. Lots about bathrooms. There's going to be someone to go into the bathroom. Didn't hear much about this story. Evidently, one of the resource officers at a Texas grade school evidently left their handgun in the third bathroom stall. Because of course, that's what you want laying around for third graders to find in the bathroom. And I'm like, what are you doing in the bathroom stall where the kids go? I mean, that was my question. Why is the resource officer even in there? How did you drop the gun in the third stall when there should be staff restrooms? This isn't every elementary school I've ever been in. You've got restrooms for the adult folk, and then you got those really low to the ground things that there's no way you're getting down to. Who's going in there? But evidently, back in January, a third grader at this elementary school in Rising Star, Texas, found the gun in the bathroom stall. Yeah. There you go. Also, Another bit of fun and entertainment. Thanks to Alabama. I don't know if you saw this story over the weekend. This guy, his name is Anthony Mitchell. Anthony Mitchell was having a kind of a mental moment, and his family called the police for an intervention to try and a welfare check, if you will. And well, they arrested him because I guess he threw some shots into the air, had the gun. So they arrested him back early January. And on January 26th, he died in jail. His body temperature, they did a rectal body temperature, 72 degrees. So what does that mean? That means they took this poor guy, and for over 2 weeks, they put him in a freezer. Because I don't know how you get a body temperature down to 72 degrees. And that's probably after a couple hours of being transported and moved around to the hospital. This, again, is another one of these moments where you've got the FBI now, I guess, is involved. You've got a lawsuit, and it's the only way we heard about this. But it makes you go, what is it with these cops? Again, I support the police when they're not wrong. Here, wrong. It's like that story from Arkansas where they, on a wellness check, they took this guy and they starved him to death in the jail cell. It was a 200 and some pound guy when they laid him on the morgue table, 90 pounds. Stop and think about that. But again, these are good, God-fearing Christian states. And the policies that they keep moving towards us are really frightening. But how do you, in the name of humanity, do such a thing to anyone? It's just beyond me. Just beyond me. And it comes back down to policies. It comes back down to oversight. It comes back down to there's got to be someone paying attention. But the good news, there is good news. Good news is Joel Osteen pays himself an annual salary of $54 million a year. Stop and think about that for a second. His church is the former Houston Summit, where the Houston Rockets used to play basketball. He drives a Ferrari, costs $270,000, lives in a 70,000 square foot mansion. But hey, when the hurricane hit Houston, wouldn't let anyone into his church. And we give them tax breaks. They don't pay taxes. We'll take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. If you miss any portion of the program, make sure you grab the podcast. Wherever you find your favorite podcast, you'll find ours. Right back after that. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1937. That was the day the National Lawyers Guild held their first convention in the nation's capital. The Guild was established as a way to bring together progressive lawyers dedicated to fighting for basic and progressive change in our political and economic system, and to assure that human rights be regarded as more sacred than property interests. Members were admitted regardless of race, sex, or political beliefs. The early Guild stood up for FDR's New Deal reforms like a full Social Security program against the staunch opposition of the American Bar Association. From its inception, protecting the rights of working people has been an important effort for the Guild. At the first convention, they passed a resolution supporting the rights of working people to organize and collectively bargain. Guild lawyers supported the founding of both the United Auto Workers and the Congress of Industrial Organizations. They also stood up for civil rights, adopting an anti-lynching resolution at their first convention. During the civil rights era, they provided legal aid for activists and fought for voting rights. This made them a target during the 1950s Cold War anti-communist hysteria. The FBI targeted the Guild for investigation. By 1955, the Guild had dropped to just 500 members. In the 1970s, the Guild successfully sued to find out the extent of FBI spying. They discovered that 1,000 informants had generated FBI files of 400,000 pages on the Guild and its members. Despite this harassment, the Guild has kept up its fight for working people. The organization has opposed anti-worker legislation from Taft-Hartley to the passage of NAFTA. In 2012, the Guild celebrated its 75th anniversary stronger than ever.
No one needs another outrage to worry about, but here's one that could literally be your last worry. Our hospitals are killing us. Not that the staffers are going room to room snuffing out patients, of course, but hospital owners and top executives are nonetheless killing thousands of ill Americans entrusted to their care. They are doing it by deliberately short-staffing their facilities and shortchanging sick and injured people they're richly paid to serve. At the core of this outrage is a fatal structural flaw in our healthcare system, namely that these are no longer our hospitals. Instead of being public or nonprofit entities for the common good, focused squarely on patients, hospitals today tend to be private operations controlled by corporate profiteers. Pitting patients against profits is no way to run a hospital, for it means money will ultimately rule over health and over life itself. Ask a nurse. These dedicated professionals are the solid pillars of American health. More than doctors and way more than administrators, nurses make a hospital function, providing the primary care and constant on-site monitoring that are the essence of an ethical, healthy system. Yet, thousands have already fled the work they love. Another third plan to leave this year, and thousands more are going on strike. Why? Because the profit system demands massive staff cuts, leaving way too few nurses to meet the basic needs of patients, causing burnout among nurses and unnecessary deaths of people they care for. A damning 2021 study revealed that forcing fewer nurses to tend to an ever larger caseload effectively killed more than 4,000 New York hospital patients in the previous 2 years alone. This is Jim Hightower saying, yet the corporate powers insist on treating nurses as just a cost to be cut, arguing that hospitals must have staffing flexibility. In other words, cut nurses, raise profits.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
Here's an interesting story. Evidently, Ron DeSantis is going to not show up to CPAC. I find that incredible. He is not going to show up to the annual Conservative Political Action Conference, which I have, affectionately dubbed as Crazy Pack, because they've really gone off the rails. And maybe this is him, going, this is Trump's crowd. We're gonna stay away from the crazy people, not put myself in a position where I'm gonna look bad because not his crowd. But I do find it interesting that maybe this is the kind of splitting of the faithful. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on the top stories of the day, our good friend Bob Ney, former Ohio congressman and political analyst. Bob, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you, Rick.
So what do you make of DeSantis skipping CPAC?
Well, DeSantis recently was starting to be hit for focusing, quote, too much on the woke. And that was just, I think, probably about the last week. Also, he may try to be centric, although he has a primary to get through. So, maybe he's just trying to have the effect. I doubt it's because he had a prior commitment.
Oh no, there's no way. I mean, that's like the who's who of the crazy now. It used to be the
and maybe that's partial why he is not doing it at this point in time.
Yeah. Well, going to be. I can't wait for Crazy Pack this time. Maybe they'll come up with another one of those golden Trump dolls that they rolled out the last.
Oh yeah, I remember that. That
years
was
ago.
Bizarre.
I want to get your thoughts on this tweet by Marjorie Taylor Greene on this national divorce thing. It just seems to me on President's Day, while the president's in Ukraine, on a national stage as commander in chief, is this the right time for something like this? And calling for treason. I mean, calling for a civil war? Does this seem kind of like the wrong thing to be doing? I just want to get your thoughts.
Well, it was revealed the other day. She went bombastic at the very end of a briefing, private briefing, on the balloon, and she was going crazy with it. And then she now, of course, suggests splitting up the U.S. by red and blue states. She called it a national divorce for people who are sick of Democrats' quote traitorous policies in a tweet. I mean, it's just she gets this attention. I mean, nobody in their right mind would even make this as a sitting office holder make this suggestion. To do this. I mean, it seriously, even though she's just completely out of her mind, but it goes back to referencing of something that was a reality in this country of two Americas, and how many people died. So I can't imagine, how people that she represents let her get away with this, because there are so many issues out there that have to be affecting those people. This is just pure political, not craziness, political entertainment on top of it.
Yeah. No, but for me, it's like, I get that this, it's any other day you throw this out, but on President's Day, while the president's in Ukraine, it just seemed like for maximum outrage, maximum trolling, this is where she went.
Well, remember too, Rick, in December of 2021, she tweeted about the same type of idea, but also suggested that if people move from, this is not a split yet, but if people move from blue to red states, they should be barred for voting for a period of time. So, I mean, she's, mask mandates compared to the Holocaust, all the conspiracy theories of QAnon, and again, she just is not in her right mind with the right faculties, but what a waste of an elected office.
But she's getting more and more attention, though. I mean, she's rising in influence,
Well, sure.
and that's the scary
Sure,
part.
that's why she does it. They said the other day at the end of the hearing they knew she would do something because she wants her time, yelling liar with the president. She wants her time in the sun, and it's just, I think it's just sad, and what a waste again of her office to do things that could help people. If once in a while somebody makes a bizarre statement, that happens all over the place. This is planned, it's methodical, it's constant, and it's really pathetic. Maybe if they don't ever print anything she says again, it might cure her.
No,
well,
I mean,
it
the problem
won't
is
cure her. Maybe it'll stop her a bit.
Yeah, the moneyed interest, the fact that this generates revenue and, there's all this buzz around it, it's sadly never going to stop. That's
right.
that's the weird thing in all of this.
Right. Yeah, it's sad.
Now, I did want to get your thoughts on the president going to Ukraine today. Good move, bad mood, especially with what's going on here at home with the East Palestine situation. Your thoughts?
Oh, it's a good move. I mean, look, I care about East Palestine. Also, I care about what happens there. It's down in our neck of the woods, but there are all kinds of things that happen in America, and those situations have to be addressed. But the job is a multitasking job, and he had some things also scheduled. But it's a big deal. It's a good thing to do because it does several things. One, it shows the Russians that we are serious to do what he did, to go into an active war zone, which is presidents have went into war zones by surprise visits. This is the first time a president has went into a war zone without us having our troops in that war zone. So they had to rely totally on the on the Ukrainians. Number two, again, it shows our resolve to help, but also for our NATO partners, I think this is also a big deal. I noticed a few of the Republicans had criticism, but it was a few. A lot of them didn't criticize him. and again they base it on, well, he goes to their border, but he doesn't come to our border and do something. It's those arguments were so weak that they only had a couple of arguments like that.
Yeah.
So I think it's totally appropriate what he did.
Yeah, I mean, I've been talking to people all day about, why am I supporting this? Because, for the most part, I've had people say, I remember you were anti-war. I go, I am anti-war, when you can avoid it. This is a situation where Russia invaded a sovereign nation. And they, from all reports, they're planning on moving on. And if Ukraine loses, I fear they go to Poland, and we end up involved in this because NATO is not going to allow them to invade a NATO country.
Right, and we're vested in this, and the majority of the citizenry supports it, and also a majority of the Congress supports it. So it's not like he went out on his own and did something. And again, I don't like the wars, especially the one that we were tricked into supporting, and I don't like it, but. This one is we're not looking for weapons of mass destruction in Ukraine. The weapon of mass destruction is Putin.
Yeah. No, it's that simple to me. And I don't know. I also want to get you're in Ohio now. Any word on the train derailment? I know your family's in the area where this has happened. Any recent news? Are you any family in the zip code that's going to be getting $1,000 from Alan Shaw?
No family up there. I mean, I know people, all over the area. I used to represent a slice of Columbiana County. Jim Traficant had the rest of it. So there's still a lot of, people wanting the transparency involved with the issue to know, the testing is continuing to go on. As far as the $1,000, I would surely hope that isn't used to say that Norfolk and Southern doesn't have liability. I would surely hope that is not used somehow by them to say they don't have liability. I just think that they've got to look at exactly what happened, how it happened, why it happened, how to prevent it, look at the specialty breaks, look at everything involved in the issue, because, there's other portions of railroads across this country that the same type of thing could happen. So the more information they get, I think the better off they are. Also, questions to be answered of why those were not labeled in the first place as dangerous, toxic chemicals.
No, absolutely. But after we talked the last time, you had brought up a couple of questions. Why wasn't there a website? Why isn't there stuff? And I actually went and that night I went and hunted it down. And there is a website. There is a phone number to call. They've had it set up almost from like a couple of days afterwards. 215-814-2400 is the phone number for the EPA Region 5. They also have response.epa.gov East Palestine train derailment as their website, which is a mouthful. But I assume if you go to the response.epa.gov, it'll be right there. But there are these resources out there. It's just that it wasn't being promoted, and I didn't know it was out there.
I didn't know either. I mean, I had at the time no idea. When I sent a message to some people in the governor's office suggesting a website, I didn't know that there was a website at that time. I mean, the information's been so sketchy, and people were just calling all over the place, to different water authorities that had no more information. In fact, the water authority local with my daughter had answered, we don't know. That's the state, not us.
We don't know. Leave us alone. And it is, but this is the EPA who has one, and I got to assume that the state might have one as well. So I got to think that they just done a really terrible job of getting that out.
Right.
Because you brought it up, and I'm like, I can't imagine that they wouldn't have thrown up a website. Any idiot can do that.
Well, they can put out Amber Alerts in areas to phones. For example, as you know, your phone goes off if it's within a certain area. I would assume they have capabilities to put out, here's a website information, and you touch a button and it can go across the phone systems for people in the area. I would assume that didn't happen, but I would think they could do that, or should be able to.
Yeah, I mean, they've got everything else. Why not be able to do something like
Right.
that? Or at least target it in a way. I mean, you got Google ads. I mean, there's got to be a way to target this in this day of instant technology. Yeah, I mean, but yeah, there is something that got there. And finally, I wanted to get your thoughts on the horrible news I got yesterday. I got it yesterday. I'm not sure when it actually came out, but President Carter is, I guess, entered hospice. I guess they moved him from the hospital back home.
Jimmy Carter is, his legacy is really being put out there now while he is, still alive. And of course, he entered hospice and chose not to have any more medical treatment. Carter, is more popular now, obviously, than when he was, president of the United States and had lost his election by a landslide. And mainly the reason, of course, there was the issue of the Saudis who cut off the gasoline. But I think we can recognize mainly it was Iran. The whole hostage crisis. He tried to do something that was a failed effort in the desert outside Tehran, and so I think that Iran was a big factor. But I have to tell you, as a person, even at that time in 1976, he may have been unpopular and he may have lost, but I think a lot of people recognize that he is just and was at that time and is now a fantastic person, fantastic human being. And after he left office, he stayed modest. I mean, he could have, presidents give pretty high-paid speeches, and they accumulate a lot of wealth. We know they do that in most cases, and I'm not criticizing them for going out and give speeches. That's their prerogative. But Carter remained dedicated to a lot of people. Still taught Sunday school. I was active with Habitat for Humanity, and I saw firsthand what he did in building home after home, using the power of his previous office to raise money to build homes for people. I mean, he's just one good, solid person, and I think a very kind person, and that has resonated through his life after he left. So he's, very, very popular, more than when he was the president.
Yeah, he was the first president I really remember. I remember reading about Nixon and about Ford, because I delivered newspapers then, but I didn't really understand what was going on. Carter was really the first president that I paid attention to. And, I remember watching, the Malaise speech and I think back of that and I go, asking Americans to sacrifice, I know it was a different era back then, but I think, imagine a politician saying, put on a sweater, suffer a little bit. I just can't imagine that.
Yeah. He formed the Carter Ford Commission for federal elections after the Bush Gore election. And we based the Help America Vote, Steny Hoyer and I based it off of the Carter Ford Commission. He was gracious enough to put his time into that, and we took their recommendations, the most of them, and put it into a piece of legislation. After it passed, they said he was going to call me, and he did. And it was kind of a surreal conversation, Rick, because he called, and he said, "How are you?" And I said, "Fine." He said, "Congratulations. I think it's next to civil rights legislation in elections. This is one of the most important things that we could do." And I thanked him, for his time and everything. And then he said something that was kind of, I met presidents and everything, but he said something that was just kind of, so Jimmy Carter. And he said, "I understand Jerry's going to be calling you, Jerry Ford." He said, "Hey, tell Jerry I said hi. I owe him a call. Tell him I'll call him." And it was just such a down-to-earth type of guy. So, good guy.
Yeah, using you as his bag man.
He was something.
Yeah, he still is. I mean, he hasn't gone yet, but I'm preparing myself because, it's sad. Yeah, sad. But Bob, I appreciate the time. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you, Rick.
Seriously, I mean, I think back to that speech, and I think back to his administration. A lot of things I would have liked to have seen differently. But I think, Bob's right. I think it was Iran that, I remember as a kid, the kids in the playground, all hopped up, ready to go to war with Iran, and me going, no, I don't think that's a great idea. Don't think it's such a good idea, because, it was just a couple years earlier that I remember, the people that came home from Vietnam being dumped into our housing project. And the fact that, you had this president trying to keep us out of that. And I do remember when Operation Eagle Claw failed. And there's a lot of conspiracy around, why that failed. But he tried to send, people in to rescue the hostages, and it failed. And that, I think, was the end of his ability to win in 1980. Again, there's a ton of potential conspiracy around that. But ultimately, the country made a decision. They made a decision to go away from the guy who wanted to put solar panels on people's homes to the guy who told you, no, you don't have to sacrifice. You don't have to put on a sweater and worry about the thermostat. We're going to oil, and made an agreement with the Saudis. And it's interesting how all of this stuff kind of plays and just keeps repeating itself. I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Gonna take a quick break. Right back. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1917. More than 400 Jewish mothers, many carrying their children, marched on City Hall in New York City. Their cry, which rang out in both Yiddish and English, was, "We want food for our children." On the eve of the U.S. entry into World War I, inflation had sent the cost of food skyrocketing. For example, in 1916, the cost for an average dinner for a medium-sized family was 76 cents. By 1917, the price had more than doubled to $1.99. At a time when families were fortunate to have an income of $40 a month, seeing grocery bills jump from $22 to $59 for the month was more than most families could bear. Working parents could not afford to feed their children. Many were forced to sell family heirlooms and pawn what possessions they had just to survive. The Mothers Anti-High Price League, a socialist-led organization, organized a march in protest of the inflated prices. In the days that followed, boycotts, sometimes violently enforced, targeted food shops accused of price gouging. Some women also attacked customers who visited the boycotted shops. Unfounded rumors swirled that the protests were a German plot. The anti-German hysteria leading up to World War I put the city on edge. By February 24th, thousands of women from all 5 boroughs gathered in Madison Square to protest the high food prices. At the front of the march waved a white flag emblazoned with the single word, starvation. City officials responded by providing cheap food for purchase throughout the city. This provided temporary relief, but did not address the impact of high inflation on food costs. Adequately feeding our nation's children is a problem the U.S. still has not solved. According to a study done in 2012, 1 in 7 households, or more than 17 million people in the United States, faced food insecurity. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. I think about that election in 1980, that being an enormous one, and the first one that I ever really paid attention to. I spent time, in the late 70s, doing kind of, kid work on campaigns, for when Kucinich was running for mayor of Cleveland. I remember, handing out, flyers for him. I didn't know why. I just remember he was in the newspaper, he was mayor, and handing out flyers. But Carter's campaign was that 1980 campaign was the first one I really paid attention to, and it was one of those moments where you go, it was a crossroads moment, and I see us very much, a couple of times since being in those moments where the choice you make, which way will you go? And Carter was talking about moving us on a path of sustainability and green energy and that. And Reagan was, no, we don't need to do any of that. And, ripped the solar panels off the White House and made sure that we're still to this day hooked on oil and fossil fuels. Whereas in that moment, we could have changed. Now, they were both similar on the neoliberal stuff that I think Biden is changing. And looking back at Carter's presidency, I do have a problem with massive deregulation. The reason the Teamsters didn't endorse Carter in 1980 and did endorse Reagan is because Carter signed trucking deregulation, which just destroyed the trucking industry and the airline industry. But again, I go back to why. Why did they do this? They did it because of the energy costs. They did it because they thought they could streamline things. They would cut down on energy costs and prices and help consumer prices. They thought they were, again, the intention being we're helping people. We're helping poor people, get through the crisis. We're making things, they did it for right, wrong, or indifferent. They're doing it because they thought it was going to help people. Whereas Republicans knew why they were doing it. It's going to help corporate America. It's going to help destroy those labor unions. It's going to help put workers in their place. Same thing with the airlines. Look what deregulation did to the airlines. Look at what's done to the trucking industry. Look at what deregulation has done across the board. It's created billionaires and multimillionaires, and it has done that. It has worked exactly as it was supposed to, but it's crushed working people. And what they've done masterfully, and you got to give them credit. They've convinced the working class of this country to think in terms of they're the boss. This Stockholm syndrome for working people, that they're going to someday be that sitting in that shiny city on the hill, looking down on those poor people. So they'll forgive a lot of these horrible things because they think someday it's going to be them. And the reality is it never is, which is why I think we have a lot of the anger we have today. I look at the Reagan years, that 80 election, and I look at 2000. 2000 was an election of, I think Al Gore is elected. I don't think we have, I don't think we have 9/11. I don't think we have an economic collapse like we did. Now, was he great for working people? Not overly. He wasn't horrible. He wasn't Bush, but he wasn't great. And this is where my view is, we as working people need to, again, take off the red hats and the blue hats and pick up a hard hat. It's the money versus the rest of us. And the sooner we wake up to that, the sooner we got a chance. Anyway, if you missed any of today's program, make sure you grab the podcast wherever you find your favorites. You'll find ours. You got a question, comment, something on your mind? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for being here. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.